Hello and welcome to another LOTRO video with me, Balthelion, and today we're going to be discussing some recent news that's been posted by the developers on the LOTRO forums, discussing loot boxes and some changes that are going to be coming with update 23, if I got the number right, which is where dragons dwell, where we're going to the Iron Hills. Now, there's been a lot of information that's kind of been dumped out, and players have been kind of digesting this and trying to work out, is it good, is it bad, and that. And some people are focusing on certain bits of information and ignoring others and just sort of drawing their own conclusions. So the purpose of this video is we're just going to have a look at all the official points that have been put forward by the developers, what they're changing, why they're changing it, and then we'll see if we can sort of establish our own conclusions from it, basically. So I will put all the links to all the various articles and tabs that I've got on my screen open at the minute below the video in the comments or the description. So if you want to have a look at these yourselves, you're more than welcome to do so. But let's start with this main one, which is posted by Severlin, the executive producer. So this was back last Monday, and it's kind of been exploding on the forums ever since. So he says, "I'm writing today to discuss changes we are making to endgame loot and how loot boxes relate to gameplay. We've been paying close attention to high-level gameplay rewards and are not entirely happy with the system in place," which is understandable. I think most players would probably agree with that assessment as well. "Now that we are increasing the level cap to 120 in Update 23 where dragons dwell, it is a great opportunity to make some adjustments and explain how things will work going forwards." So fair enough, and we appreciate the transparency that they're giving us. "We should reward you for playing the game." We'd agree with that. "Progression should come from playing the game first and foremost. Before I talk specifics, let's talk about our goals with the system, the rules under which we want to operate, and how loot boxes fit into that system." So we've now got their 4 guiding principles for how loot in loot boxes should work, which follows that all their changes they're going to make are to basically adhere to these rules. So number 1, there should be no gear in loot boxes that you do not have a chance to acquire by playing the game. And I think most players would be happy with that. There should be nothing that's unique to a loot box that you might have to pay to get, so there's no pay to win aspect. So he says, if gear is in a loot box, it should also appear on a game vendor or as a reward for content within a short period of time. And this short period of time statement is going to be something which will come up later in this, so bear that in mind. Rule number 2. On the day that new content is released, players should not be able to get the brand new gear with endgame currency or store purchases. So again, try and avoid pay to win here. The initial rush of gear needs to come from playing the new content and getting rewards for completing it. As such, the vendors for gear and loot boxes will not appear until a few weeks after that content is released. Okay, so your vendors for your new endgame rewards that you can get in as an alternative to the loot boxes will not appear for a specified period of time after the new content comes out. And the number they seem to be toying with at the minute is about 2 weeks, but that could change as they make adjustments. Rule number 3, gear that comes from a new raid at the highest difficulty or the equivalent raid completion gated vendor will always have more power than comparable gear that comes directly from loot boxes. In other words, raid gear from the highest difficulty of the raid will be the best gear in the game. Again, I think most people would be willing to accept that. Even if you're not necessarily a hardcore raider, you can understand why the hardest gear would come from that source. And you only really need gear that is such high statted in order to complete the raid in the first place. If you're just a casual player that has no interest in playing raids or instances, you probably don't need the best gear in the game, so arguing that you need to be able to get it kind of falls a bit flat on that respect. And then the 4th and final point, if gear comes from a raid, you need to complete the raid at least once before you can obtain the gear from a vendor using endgame currency. This remains unchanged. So that's kind of the same mechanic that they've had for the Abyss of Mordeth raid, where you can get the gear from the vendors. The vendors require a certain amount of currency, but you need to have beaten various bosses on, tier 1 or tier 2 difficulty in order to be able to do the barter option, basically. So that's not going to change. So some people have been concerned that maybe that means you only need to do the raid once, and then there'll be nobody to run the raids because everyone's done it once. They've unlocked that requirement, and now they don't need to do it. But we've seen with the existing content, all the raiders seem quite content that they're still able to get their groups and that certainly within like raiding kins and that. There's not been people that are just doing it once and then dropping off. They enjoy the challenge of running the content, which is why they do it. So carrying on then. The above should help you understand how we want loot to work in LOTRO and set clear meta rules for the future. If we stray from this, let us hear it. Sometimes, especially in our preview environment, you'll see gear show up out of order or gear that doesn't have its power level set. So this is based on the Bull Roar server. Stats kind of fluctuate quite a bit, so not to be alarmed at that. But if you see something that isn't right, please bring it to our attention so we can fix it. It's okay. Now, with all this guideline, let's explain how our endgame systems will work in Update 23. Gear will be rewarded for running content while you level up to 120. From quests and deeds, reputation barters, instance chests, and defeating bosses in the raid, which will be released later this year. So they're talking about the new raid here. In general, instance gear will be better than questing gear. Understandable. Raid gear will be better than instance gear. Also understandable. And content with higher tiers of difficulty reward gear than easier content. So basically, the harder the content you do, the better the rewards. And again, I think everyone would be happy with that. This is pretty much how things work now, so there's no change to this. Our new currency for our end game in Where Dragons Dwell and beyond is called Embers of Enchantment. Okay, Embers can be earned for doing weekly quests and by deconstructing gear you don't want. This disenchantment process may also be familiar to you, as it's what you've been doing with Ashes of Enchantment. Okay. So they're basically going to be splitting things out into two tiers of rewards, which they're going to start talking about here. So the first one is Embers, which they've just mentioned. The second one is Motes, which is coming up. One big difference in Update 23 and beyond is we will reward Embers of Enchantment to you directly when you do endgame quests, rather than indirectly through loot box keys. You'll accumulate enough Embers to buy the gear you want from a vendor. This helps fight random luck when trying to get the stuff you want. The Ember vendors won't have gear from the most recent endgame group content until around 2 weeks or so after that content is released. So the only way to get this gear when the content is first released is to play through the content. Finally, the vendor may have a requirement that you complete the content before you can pick any of the gear. Okay, so what that means is there will be a Embers vendor in the new region, and they're basically going to be covering the current endgame content. So it will be level 115, which is the current level cap, up through level 120. And for some, if not all of the available options for what they will sell, that will not be made available for a period of time, say 2 weeks after the content goes live. But that will basically offer you anything that you can get out of a loot box. And in those cases where it might also sell the instance gear, if there is a requirement to complete a certain instance or a certain raid on, say, tier 1, tier 2, to get those items, they'll also be available through that vendor. Okay. Older content will work on a similar system with its own currency. Ashes of Enchantment, which is our current currency, are becoming motes of enchantment, and you'll earn new motes of enchantment by running older content. Older gear will also disenchant to motes of enchantment, and motes of enchantment items will have their own vendors. So you have a motes vendor and you have an embers vendor. Quests that used to bestow keys or key slivers will bestow motes directly instead of black steel keys. Okay, so this is to stop you running old content to get the latest rewards for the new content. So the two examples we've got here are in Northern Mirkwood. We have the Restoring the Three Kingdoms quest. So this is a twice a week quest. You do a bunch of quests and you get a black steel key. Okay, that will no longer give a black steel key after update 23. Instead, they're going to reward you with a portion of motes of enchantment. So this is the non-level cap currency, because obviously we would have moved up to the new region by then. Similarly, in Mordor, you have the daily and weekly quests. If you do the dailies, you get a sliver of a black steel key, or whatever it's called, which you can buy 3 of those to get a black steel key. So again, those will go away, and instead every day you'll be rewarded with a portion of motes of enchantment. And it'll be something similar in the new region, that instead of having some sort of repeatable at the end of the content that you can just do to get your key, instead they will give you directly the new embers of enchantment. Okay, and then you can take those embers and enchantment to the vendor and barter for whatever you want, instead of having to open a loot box and maybe you get what you want, maybe you don't. Maybe it's worth something that you can sell on the auction house and then get some money back and then buy what you want, or maybe it's just complete trash and you've just wasted your time, and no one likes that. Okay, so how do loot boxes fit into all of this? Loot boxes will continue to appear in game, and you can buy keys from the LOTRO store to open them. So this is what everyone's latched onto, is the fact that you can still buy it from the store. So everyone's screaming pay to win, but let's objectively look at all the rest of this. So the loot boxes will have cosmetics, gear, with identical gear available from the Ember vendors and some Embers. The gear and cosmetics will be available on the Embers vendor at the same time it debuts in a loot box. Okay, so loot boxes and the vendors will sell stuff at the same time. If it's gear that's rewarded from doing content in the new region, you have to do the content in the new region first, or later you can buy it via Embers after a specified period of time. I've lost where I am. Both new loot box items and new vendor items will arrive a few weeks or so after new content is released. Loot boxes are not required to gear up, but can be used to help you catch up on gearing, which is pretty much what most people do anyway. I don't know about you guys, but certainly with my lower level characters, I will tend to use things like the Matham armor or any other loot that I've got out of loot boxes from Mordor loot boxes to gear up low level characters before they do the content. So it's pretty much as what they're saying here. And it can also be used to acquire cool cosmetics. If you don't want to buy a key for a loot box, you can instead run content to earn embers for the items. We absolutely want to reward players who are awesome enough to support the long-term success of the game by opening loot boxes and get joy in doing it. But we don't want players to feel like they are forced to open loot boxes in order to play or excel in the game. So they're saying, we're offering loot boxes to those that want it, but we don't want you to feel forced that you have to open it. We don't want you to feel like it's pay to win. Okay. We've been carefully reading your thoughts about loot boxes in recent months, and we've had a near equal amount of discussion inside the office as well. We're encouraged by your passion for the game, and we want to make sure we support your decision to be here with us. Severlin. So that was their initial statement. So then, of course, the forums have exploded, as they naturally do. So there's been a lot of questions being asked of the developers, and they've been responding on those. So we're going to take a look now at some of these responses that have come back. So one player here has decided to kind of break down what they understood from that initial article, and Cordovan, the community manager, has responded to some of these. So the player has asked for clarification on all these bullet points. So the player says loot boxes are staying, but they're no longer part of the actual endgame content, because dailies are no longer awarding keys or slivers, and instead are granting embers or motes directly. Therefore, running level 115 dailies to acquire level 120 gear is therefore not possible. And they've said, well, loot boxes may appear in endgame content, because you might still be rewarded with loot boxes, or you might find the boxes as drops. So he doesn't think that quite matches the player's interpretation, but he has said that the player is correct that endgame content will not reward keys, and instead will grant embers that will be used to acquire items from a vendor when the vendor is available. And yes, you will not be able to run under level dailies to get level 120 gear. Okay. Then the player has made the assumption we can no longer earn black steel keys from dailies. We can only acquire them from the store after update 23 goes live. Keys acquired from dailies before the update will still be usable though. Okay, and then Cordovan has said, yes, you can no longer earn keys from dailies, and yes, previously acquired keys will still be usable on both the old and the new loot boxes. Okay, so don't worry if you've got a stash of them left over that you haven't used yet, they will still work. And the players also assumed the Embers currency can be used to barter for all the new loot box rewards on a vendor, and eventually for instance and raid rewards as well, though deed requirements may or will still apply. Even players choosing not to participate in opening loot boxes, which will now require store purchases, can still earn any of the rewards that loot boxes will offer. And he says yes and no, in that we intend to put gear available in a loot box on a vendor at the same time as they are released, which will be a little while after the content released. Okay. We are, however, leaving open the possibility that we might want to put rare or special loot in content, like rare raid or instance loot, that might not appear on a motes or Embers vendor. Okay. So anything in a loot box does appear on the vendor, but some things might be exclusive to running the instance or the raid content, which might not appear on the vendor. Okay. Which is understandable. There's maybe a couple of like shiny pocket item or something like that. Shiny cloak, who knows. And then the last point the player made was old loot box rewards and gear will be available for motes, which our current ashes will be converted into, and which we will acquire from running level 115 dailies or disenchanting non-level cap gear. And Cordovan said, yes, that's correct. Your current ashes will be converted to motes, and motes will be used to barter for older loot box rewards and gear. In general, motes will be available by running older content that used to provide Embers, but I don't think we want to get locked down forever on a specific 115 daily. And he says he's added on the second half of your post regarding the timing of loot box items during point updates. The plan is to release items in content, then release it a few weeks later or so in loot boxes and vendors. So that applies to both the main updates, so like update 23, and point updates, which is what they mean for the smaller intermediate releases, so 23.1, 23.2, etc. before we move on to update 24. So yeah, it's just clarifying a few of those points. Then someone said, for those who like the cosmetics and such in loot boxes, will there be a way to trade ash, so presumably means ashes of enchantment, to become motes of enchantment for keys? And he said no, so you can't trade motes or embers to get keys. The only way to get the keys will be through the store, or any legacy keys that you might have. Okay. Then one player's taken exception to the idea that with each expansion pack or level increase, we've been blessed, sarcastically, with a new grand universal currency that was supposed to fix the loot system and make it last forever, but every time that there's maybe something that changes. So Vastin, as another one of the devs, has said it's unlikely we'll achieve a universal currency at any particular point, and to be honest, this is not really our goal. Alas, keeping MMO currencies from inflating and devaluing over time is a surprisingly difficult feat, given that we don't have the checks and balances of supply and demand or any kind of currency value anchors that you might see in the real world. Heck, keeping real world currencies balanced is a bit of a trick, as anyone who likes to keep track of things is likely aware. Honestly, the only MMO that even tries to maintain something approaching a single stable currency is EVE Online, they claim to have to keep economists on staff to achieve it, which they do. So they actually run the EVE Online economy like it's a real economy, and they balance it in terms of like equating it to real world dollars, and just try and make sure that the cost of things doesn't inflate. They can keep it in a nice kind of sweet spot, which is, to my knowledge, the only MMO that does that. I don't think anyone else does that. Every other MMO is at the mercy of how much people want to buy and sell things for in the auction house. There's no way of kind of stimulating the economy. Which he goes on to say, which is cool, but this is not the focus of a game like LOTRO. So as much as we'd like to do some currency, or other, to be a stable and enduring thing forever, that's not generally how it works. But it would certainly be nice. If this one lasted a while. We'll see how it goes. Okay. So this is not necessarily meant to be like the one and all solution forever for content going forwards. But they have set it up that they can adjust this going forward. So at the minute, when update 23 goes live, the embers will be used for the new content, so level 115 to 120, and the motes will be used for the old content, so everything up to 115. And then let's say, hypothetically, if they were to do another level cap increase from 120 to 125, then the range of 120 to 125 would be the new embers one. Any old embers would be converted into motes, and motes would work for level 1 through to 120. So everything that is not the new region is motes, everything that is the new region is embers, basically. And they could keep doing that going forwards, which remains to be seen how well they do that. So, moving on. So another player asked, Cordovan, will keys drop randomly in landscape content like the older keys do? I like the older system of keys and loot boxes, so I'm hoping so. Will there still be loot boxes with keys available from meta deeds in new areas? So there's 2 points here. So do keys still drop as loot? And do you still get them from the meta deeds? So if you complete all deeds in a region, so all the exploration deeds, all the questing deeds, all the slayer deeds, you generally get a loot box which is appropriate to the level of the region and a key to open it, which are bound to you so you can't sell it on. And he said no. Keys will no longer appear in in-game content, whether it be landscape, instance reward, whatever. So there are no more keys dropping in the game. You can only get them through the store. Instead, you'll earn the motes or embers of enchantment directly. So the meta deeds should now start giving you motes and embers. If you were to, if you're not going to get any keys dropping in your loot from landscape or maybe opening a chest or anything like that. But any other sources where you would get a key, so daily quests, weekly quests, that kind of stuff, you're going to get the motes or embers directly. And you can use those motes or embers to buy the things from the vendor. So there's no random chance anymore. Okay, you don't have to open a loot box and maybe you've got a 10% chance of getting the item you want. You just take whatever you've got in place of getting the key for the loot box and just go buy it outright. Okay, so that is good in a way. Now this is the interesting thing that someone's found while they were on Balthelion. This is a player's comment. So the players have also speculated on a new type of loot box, the Traveller's Steelbound loot box, for level 10 through to level 115, that would replace all old loot boxes. But he speculated that maybe it's just the old Golgoroth loot box getting a new name and new level requirements. Okay. He did think that the old loot boxes, gold, dwarven, etc. will still be the same, but not 100% sure. Okay. So it seems, and this is speculation, so we've got the Traveller's Steel Lootbound loot box here, which is basically be level 10, which was the old level of the lowest loot box, the bronze loot box, up through the end game, so it can be opened at any level after level 10 basically. But the contents of the rewards from this loot box will scale from 10 to 115. So in other words, the motes of enchantment item levels. Okay. So it's possible that the old loot boxes, bronze loot box, barrow iron, gold, dwarven, elf, etc., will no longer drop post update. You might still have those legacy boxes which you can open with the various keys. But now in future, if you get any landscape drops of a loot box, loot boxes will still drop landscape and content, then you might get this all-in-one loot box instead now. Okay. There is also a Heroes Steelbound loot box, which is minimum level 116. So this is minimum level of the latest content through to the level cap. So this will be the 116 to 120 loot box, where you're going to get the brand new latest content. Whereas you can see at the bottom there, the contents of this loot box scales from 116 to 120. Okay, so this one will give you your latest endgame gear. This one will give you everything else. Okay, and again, this is just from Balthelion, so this could be subject to change. Okay, but any existing loot boxes should still work the same. At worst case, maybe they might get converted to a Traveller's one on upgrade. And any existing keys that you have will also still exist. Okay, You're not going to lose them overnight once the update goes live. So then Severlin has come back. He's had a read through the thread. He's tried to answer some of the questions that have been asked. So he says, the current plan is that everything from loot boxes, cosmetics and gear will still be available in-game. Gear from the endgame loot box will be on a vendor that accepts the Embers of Enchantment. Okay, endgame vendor, Embers of Enchantment. Cosmetics from the endgame loot box will be on a vendor that accepts Figments of Splendor. Okay, so cosmetics need Figments of Splendor. Gear disenchants into Embers and cosmetics, including things like mounts, pets and normal cosmetic gear, will disenchant into Figments. The Embers vendor also sells Figments of Splendor so that you can convert Embers of Enchantment into Figments of Splendor, but you will not be able to convert Figments back into Embers or into motes. Okay, so you can disenchant stuff, disenchant gear rewards to get currency for cosmetics, but you can't disenchant cosmetics to get stuff for gear. Okay. The reason for having Figments of Splendor is so that players playing higher level characters can pursue cosmetics on vendors in lower level content without feeling the need that they need to do the older content, because maybe the player wasn't playing the game at that period in time, maybe they skipped over it just because it is more convenient for leveling so they don't have to grind through the entire region. Maybe it's a region they don't like playing content wise, so they always try and skip over it, but there's a couple of rewards they might be interested in. So again, that is a nice way of doing things. And lower level characters can still get the cosmetics from the end game by earning Figments of Splendor. Okay. Another cool thing about Figments of Splendor is that we could eventually make other content provide Figments of Splendor. For example, various festival quests might have an option to provide Figments of Splendor, so festival participants can pick up items from the Figments of Splendor vendor. To clarify, we do not have plans to allow all cosmetics in the game to disenchant into Figments, but we do have that option for various areas of the game as time goes on. So it's something they might be working towards, but we'll see how we go. This is just kind of a phase 1. Our plan for older content is that it no longer is considered endgame. For content that is no longer considered endgame, is to convert the system away from keys as well. Older content will drop motes of enchantment, and the game will have vendors that accept motes of enchantment for older loot. The new leveling loot box, which is the Traveller's one, would drop loot that scales to the level of the character opening the box. So it's basically similar to what the Hobbit Presents do. When the Hobbit Presents, you open them, if you get some Matham armor, and you open up the Matham armor box, it will be gear appropriate to your character. So let's say if you're a level 86 character, you'll get level 86 gear. If you're a level 20 character opening the same box, you'll get level 20 gear, and so on. So it scales to the level of the character opening the box with a minimum level of 30 and a maximum level of 115. Gear would disenchant into motes of enchantment, and cosmetics would disenchant into Figments of Splendor. We will still honour the sturdy steel keys and have a way to get older loot boxes so that remaining keys can still be used and players will find a use for them. We are working on a way to do that. Okay, so there are no plans to do away with sturdy steel keys yet, though they have made some comments that implies that they are going to get away with, do away with them at some point in the future, but they're not going to be made useless. You will still be able to do something with them. Okay. We're trying to determine how much of the older game we can convert before the next update, so I don't want to get into specifics about what will be in place until the team has had a chance to assess the progress of those efforts. Okay, so they want to apply this to everything that's come in the past, but it's a lot of work, so they need time to do it. Okay, so I think realistically when update 23 goes live, motes and the whole motes vendor system is probably going to apply to Northern Mirkwood and Mordor at a minimum. Okay, the two latest regions, which will still run at endgame because they're both 115 regions. Anything prior to that, it probably will be touch and go. We'll see how much they convert prior to that. Okay. Some older areas might not be converted into a later release. Okay. Now, it does say there's a couple of heads up. There are a small number of cosmetic items that currently disenchant into Ashes of Enchantment. With the new system, these items will disenchant into Figments of Splendor. So if you would rather have Ash and have it convert into motes, disenchant them before the update. Okay? Probably not. You'd probably be more than happy with the Figments of Splendor, but that is something to bear in mind. Okay? Bear in mind, motes is the old currency. You can't use it for the new stuff, which is the embers. So I don't think that's really a huge caveat there. In the new system, cosmetic pets that can be earned from loot boxes will have an account bind status, but they will also disenchant into Figments of Splendor. Okay. So you can't get this super rare reward from a loot box, sell it to other players for tons of gold, which could potentially be one of those things that could be exploited by gold sellers and gold farmers. So you can either keep the pet or you disenchant it and get the Figments, basically. Cordovan will be working on a separate post explicitly lining the heads up information to increase the chances of people seeing it. Okay. So I don't think that's been posted just yet, but we should see that before the update goes live. Okay. Then someone says we shouldn't need a damn currency conversion chart in order to play and enjoy the game. And Cordovan's agreed with him, basically. So he's summarised everything that's been said so far. So endgame loot box gear returns a gear currency. Endgame loot box cosmetics will return a cosmetic currency, Figments of Splendor. Okay. You can swap gear currency for cosmetic currency, but not the other way round. We intend to put both cosmetics and gear obtained from the endgame loot box into the Embers vendor. Sturdy steel keys are going away, but it will take some time, and you'll be able to do something with your deprecated keys. Non-endgame loot boxes will still be useful through most of the non-level cap range. Okay, so older loot boxes can still be used to get gear for older content, basically, is what he's saying. So, next up, I'm going to play you a little bit of Cordovan's live stream, where he's answered some of the questions about loot boxes. Just gives you a little bit of contextual information as well. So let's just hide myself and have a listen to this, guys.
Why no more keys for old loot boxes? That is because we are transitioning those old loot boxes to use a currency system rather than a key system. What will happen to sturdy steel keys? Will they be phased out, and if so, what will happen to the keys given for the anniversary? We'll have to sort through that. Yeah, they're basically going to be phased out, with some ability to use what you already have. And then for the anniversary gift, we'll probably just have to replace it with something else. So.
Okay, so what he was talking about there, and I've managed to mess that up. So when he's talking about the anniversary keys, he's talking about, for those players that have been playing the game for more than a year, at various milestones, I don't remember which years off the top of my head, but if your account is, 1 year old, 2, 3, 4, 5, 10, whatever, at the point of the anniversary festival, at certain years you'll get rewarded keys, sturdy steel keys, as part of your rewards for that year. So a lot of my brand new characters, if I create a new character, maybe I get something like 3 sturdy steel keys that I can use, but they're bound to that character. So he's basically saying we're going to phase those out at some point, but it's probably not going to be when this update goes live. But in the future, we'll get rid of those, and we'll put something else in of a suitable quality instead. Okay, it remains to be seen. They don't seem to have decided upon what they want to do there. But those keys, if you've already looted them, you can still use them to open up boxes. And then for any new characters at some point in the future, once they've replaced those rewards with something else, it'll give you something else. Okay, so you're not going to lose out. That's the important thing. One player has said, if I understand correctly, you need to buy keys in the store to open all loot boxes, but you can barter for the items instead with motes or embers. This sounds like a good thing. If I am craving one special item, I barter instead of relying on chance. If I feel lucky, I could buy a key. And he says, yes, that's correct. Okay. So the idea is, as I've said already, instead of getting rewarded with a box and a key, you open that up, there's a chance to get something. Maybe you don't even know what's in the loot tables as well. but you have a chance to get something. Maybe it's nice and you want it. Maybe it's something you don't want, but you could sell it on if it has value. Most of the time it's something you open up and you're not really interested. It's a load of rubbish and it's kind of a waste of the key. Okay, now that's not fun if you've just used a key that you've got in-game that's dropped as random loot. Okay, it's obviously going to be even less fun if it's a key that you got from the store and you opened and you got nothing. Okay, which is kind of why they want to get rid of all this kind of stuff. They'll keep the keys in there for those that get their kicks from opening the loot boxes. They're still there. You can still buy them with LOTRO points. You don't have to spend the real money, but it will obviously deplete your LOTRO points total. But for most players, you would much rather be in a position where you can say, right, I want this one specific cosmetic, this one specific piece of chest armor or something like that. That you can basically just play the game. You've got the currency that you need to go barter for it. You barter for it. You've got the one item you want. Fantastic. And then if you want a second item, you just rinse repeat. It's no different to how pretty much all the MMO rewards have worked in the past, really. Whether it's medallions of Moria or something. You play the game, you get enough medallions, you go and barter for the Moria gear. That kind of stuff. It's no different to that. So basically, it's just meaning that those people that aren't interested in loot boxes don't have to touch loot boxes at all anymore, which is good on the whole. I am optimistic about this. It remains to be seen how it works in game, but as with all things, and it's something that not necessarily is going to be the be all and end all once it does get implemented. There could be changes for this going forwards. So, do the Mordor meta deeds, like Deeds of Udon, still award black steel keys when Update 23 hits live servers? And Cordovan has said, no, they will not, because this is in line with their previous statements that no keys will drop in-game as part of deeds, as part of landscape loot, or anything like that, okay? The only way you get the keys after Update 23 is via the store. Which brings us on to kind of like a final bit of discussion with one of these articles that's actually been on the LOTRO site for about a few months now, I think this is. But I've been meaning to do a video about this. But with all the recent discussion about loot boxes and loot box rewards, it was kind of like good to kind of like tie this into this, basically. So the existing Gorgoth steel-bound loot boxes, it's an explanation of how the loot tables for this work, okay? Now, all loot boxes will adhere to this kind of style, okay? It doesn't get into the details of what's the percentage of getting the top tier rewards, what's the percentage of getting a common tier rewards, etc. But it gives you an idea of how the system works. And this system will still apply to new loot boxes, to the existing loot boxes that are in the game, the legacy loot boxes that will still continue to be around after Update 23, okay? So they've used the example of the Gorgoth Steelbound loot box. So these will yield one item from each of the following tables below. Each item has a chance of appearing, which is explained using the following colour-coded legend, okay? So we've got very common gear, rare gear, very rare gear, and then extremely rare gear, which is the top tier rewards, okay? So if a member of the Free Peoples, so a normal player character, opens up this box, they will get one piece of class-specific gear, which is rare through legendary essences, okay? And they will get one of a cosmetic or a crafting component of those various qualities, and a varying number of ashes of enchantment, okay? Could be 120 at the most common level, or if you're really lucky, you get 1,200, okay? Whereas if a monster player was to open the box, they can only get consumables, sigils, and commendations, because obviously the monster player side of things doesn't have all the fancy bells and whistles that normal characters have, okay? And then underneath that, I'm not going to read through all of this stuff, but it breaks it down as to, what for class-specific gear, what is class-specific rare gear? Well, it could be any of these. What's the class-specific incomparable gear? And so on, okay? So it breaks down underneath, what could be all of the items in this category, okay? You're not going to be told what the odds are, but you'll be told what is in the loot table, okay? And it is an interesting read to see through what kind of stuff you get. Because it might be some things in here you didn't even realise that you could get out of the loot boxes, and, maybe then you're going to think, I would really like that item, but I can't be bothered to open 100 loot boxes until I get it. well, that's understandable. But under the new system that they're going to implement, you know, let's say you're after a rare pet cosmetic, a white peacock, for example. Instead of having to open 100 loot boxes until you get that one item, or wait for another player to loot it and sell it on the auction house for an obscene amount of money, you can just save up your Figments of Splendor in this case, because it's a cosmetic item, take it to the vendor and go and barter for it, and that's it. So it enables you to get the bits of gear and cosmetics that you want, hopefully at a rate of time and gameplay that is acceptable to you, as opposed to having to rely on random chance and the opening of loot boxes, which is good. Okay. The other half of this article as well also starts talking about the Hobbit presents. Okay. So Hobbit presents aren't the same as the loot boxes. They're just purely login rewards, but they do work on a similar principle of having different loot tables and chances of getting qualities of gear. Nothing is changing with Hobbit presents as we go into update 23. It's possible they might stick in some new items in the loot tables, but the system as a whole is not changing. Okay. So there's two types of Hobbit presents. You've got the silver presents, which every player can open on a daily basis. Just log into the game, open the present once per account, and that's it. And then you also get the gold presents, which can be only opened by VIP subscribers. You can open one of those per account every week, and it resets on the Thursday. So silver presents offer one of the following. Okay, so we've got common presents, which includes marks, skirmish marks, currency, rally horns, attack and run speed boosts, so generally stuff you're not too interested in. Sometimes it can be nice to get some marks if you're running a bit low, but the rest of those I wouldn't say are massively useful. You've got the uncommon presents, which will reward you, again, currencies, but probably in greater quantities, landscape soldier tokens, relics and enhanced XP supplies. And then your rare presents, which are your things like your stat tomes, your universal crafting tools, legacy upgrades, starlit crystals, crystals of remembrance, relic removal scrolls, basically the valuable stuff that you would like to get your hands on. Okay. Then they also say underneath that gold presents also have an additional tier above rare, so very rare essentially. Okay. So gold presents select from all of the items available as silver presents, but do not award silver present common items. Okay. So gold presents do not reward any of these. Instead, they reward uncommon, rare, or the very rare category. Okay. The very rare category includes 200 mythal coins, tomes of stat bundles, which contain stat tomes 1 through 5 for the name stat, premium relic packs, 5 legacy tier upgrades, aka scrolls of empowerment, or a blemished symbol of the Elder King. Now, the drop chance of that very rare category is going to be astronomically low, okay, but it is something that is in there. But yeah, that's hopefully been quite an informative video for you guys. I hope you've enjoyed listening to me ramble on about this. This has probably been quite a long video, but I'd be interested to hear what your guys' thoughts are on the changes to loot boxes. Do you think this is going to be a good idea? Are you cautiously optimistic like me? Do you think this is a terrible idea? Are you concerned it might be, you know, a pay-to-win grab, which I don't think it is, but maybe you're concerned it is? I'd love to hear what you guys think, so let me know in the comments. Other than that, I hope you guys have enjoyed it. Please like, comment, subscribe if you enjoyed this video, and I will see you guys next time.